ever been to the mid-levels in Hong Kong, you know you don't need a gate to separate you from the poor. You know that you don't need a gate to make it so that you can live a completely different lifestyle that is totally disassociated with the other people who live near you or the other people who happen to live in your country. The places in urban areas, like the mid-levels in Hong Kong, where they just build a 50-story apartment building on top of a mountain, makes it so you can be physically separated from the people who are near you, from the people who might need your help, without needing a gate to do it. The problem is, the gate is a lot more necessary in suburban areas. The gate is a lot more necessary in places that are outside of the urban areas which do have wealthy districts, which do have wealthier areas. I'm going to talk to you about how we get suburban flight away from suburban areas and into the wealthy urban areas, away from the outlying and more rural areas into the urban areas, and get people out of the places where they are most needed, get people to stop people from moving into these communities in the first place, and make it more likely that if they do stay there, that they turn inward anyway. Recognize that Proposition 8 is dependent upon the idea that walking outside and having to see people, or like driving out, for example, out of your closed garage instead of driving out from behind a gate is somehow going to change your perspective on the world, make you want to empathize with people more, make you want to pay more taxes and set up shops and all these kinds of things that people actually need. We would tell you that that isn't actually the case. That on the margins people are going to move away. That on the margins people are not going to be willing to move into those areas in the first place. And that's what actually makes these places worse off, because it's a lot harder to get past a giant spatial barrier across the country or across a city, and it is to get across a physical barrier which is in a gate. So why is there going to be massive suburban flight in these areas? And why is that a huge problem? So in general, the wealthiest areas in developing countries are in the cities. They have more businesses, they have more people to draw from, all of those things. Suburban areas and rural areas are the ones that are starting to get more people to move into them. Even smaller cities now. A city like Hangzhou in China, which is relatively, parts of it are still relatively rural, parts of it are relatively suburban, and yet they need a lot more development and more people living there in order to make it such that they can get a stable economy and a growing economy. These kinds of cities are the ones which were founded based on the gated communities, which people then moved around, and the people that were already living there were able to get some source of an income from these capital inflows that were coming from these individuals. People don't move to these smaller cities, and the developing cities and the emerging cities where they don't have to, because they recognize that they don't have to live in a gate, because they don't want to have their kids go play outside when they think that they could be in danger of a serious threat. That doesn't mean they try to improve the police force. No, it makes their kids play inside. It makes it so that they get a drive-in, a drive-in driveway or garage, so they don't have to be in the outside world. These kinds of things still happen. So first of all, people turn inward before I get there.
Okay. There is going to be continued inequality and separation on both sides. Under our side, though, you are forced to rely on the government services. Is it given that? Is it not more likely that you're going to put pressure to improve those services when you can't separate yourself from them, meaning they will generally improve the quality of services for everyone?
So I actually don't buy that. The warrants that they tried to give you for why you'll have to engage and rely on government services more is because, for example, you'll need the police force. But again, if you don't have to leave your home to protect your car or whatever, so you can drive to the garage, but if you don't need anyone, you can still go to a private school, you can still go to a shopping mall, for example, which takes a membership card in order to enter. All of these things mean you still don't have to rely on the local people. You still don't have to rely on the local services. You can still get the kinds of services that you would get within the gated community. Now, they just become without a gate and they become selective services. This doesn't mean that you actually get the kind of engagement that they want you to have. So why are people going to turn inward? People are going to turn inward because if they do, if it is true that they will stay there and they need these kinds of jobs, they just continue to live in their home. They get the kind of garage I talked about. They get the kinds of things that make it so they don't actually have to engage with people in the outside world. Maybe they don't tend their lawn as well because they're worried people will step on it. Whatever it is, we think it's true that these individuals won't necessarily, if they don't move, and they won't actually have to engage more. Driving out of your garage in your tinted windows is the same as driving out of your gated community in your tinted windows. And there's not a significant, meaningful difference unless they prove to you that there is, and we all prioritize perhaps the safety of these people or the ability of these individuals to move in communities where they might be needed. So we think that people are going to turn inward. But suburban flight is a huge problem because these suburban areas are the ones that have different needs. They need certain services that are not provided in the status quo. They need someone who will purify their water better than they are now, for example, whereas they might have that in urban areas. I mean, these individuals and these kinds of services need to be provided, and oftentimes they're provided by people who have experience in business making. These individuals, when they move into these communities, because they recognize that there is a massive need, and they recognize that they can be safe in that community and develop a business in that community that can still make them wealthy and keep them safe, they're a lot more likely to do it than just the fact that they can get a mediocre job in a city or stay in that city and stay wealthy. I think these individuals are much less likely to actually remain in urban areas. They're more likely to go out of the suburbs, which means you don't get the kinds of needs provided in the suburb that you needed, or the developing cities, meaning that these cities now collapse instead of being successful, whereas they might have been before. This is an enormous problem. What did we get from the last speaker? She tells us that you have separate shops in your gated communities. Again, membership cards make it so they're still separate, even if the outside door is the one closest to the society as opposed to like around the gate. I don't think this is the meaningful difference we're talking about.
Sir, our policy is not perfect, but you need to engage with the comparative. What is this? People turning inward within gated communities where they are totally closed off, or people without gated communities and at least some more points of interaction?
I think when you take away an individual's choice to live in a community that they can feel safer in, where their kids can play outside in, you have a pretty high burden of showing these people to actually have a meaningful impact on the economy or on social structures of a society. I really don't think they've proven that to us, and I think that that is the case, that there is a chance that on the margins people will not move into these areas, and on the margins people will move out of these areas, and these areas will not get the services that they need. That's all the burden that we have to fill in order to win this round, is to show you the comparative is actually a little bit worse. What did we get? We got separate shops, again, membership cards will deal with this. She tells us that you'll feel like there are two different nations, and we've got different communities. These different communities are still set up either way. When you live in a wealthy urban area, you still feel totally disassociated with the community. And yet, when there's massive wealth living in outlying suburban areas or outlying rural areas, that these are the kinds of places where you actually do get the sorts of changes that lead to political movements that can enlarge and better the community. Things like South Africa are a pretty good example of this. So sure, there might be areas where you don't need gates, but there are lots of gated communities. There's lots of separation and inequality between people. Steph told you a lot of analysis about how the differential idea of who you are and your place in society, these kinds of things make it so that people recognize the inequality that they're faced with. When there's a house standing there, it's a lot different than a house and tons of other wealthy houses with beautiful lawns in a gated community. I think that it's better to have that insofar as those people recognize exactly what they don't have, instead of just saying that there's another house on the block that might have a garage, might have a car that can drive into it later that day. I think that when we've shown you that there are massive safety benefits to these individuals that make it so that their kids are going to want to live in urban areas as opposed to suburban areas. We show you that at least at some level there's a path of life. We show you that at least some level they're going to be less likely to move into these areas. And insofar as that's true, and these kinds of developing cities and developing suburbs are the ones that need the wealthy people most, that are the future of the developing world, and these kinds of communities are going to be the ones that are screwed over and that aren't going to be successful in the long run. We're very proud of them.